to subvert that. To try to do so is treason. It's a hanging trial. That's what he's trying to tell you. Within America, believe it or not, that's one of their biggest concerns. Their concerns isn't free speech. You can't really bust them for that, but I'm talking about what they're guilty of, what they're caught cold. They're caught cold in an attempted genocide of Indo-European children. We've talked about potential tribunals in Europe, and they won't hesitate to call them. But in America, there is a really, really vicious and brutal attack that could happen, and that is under the Constitution. Because under the right political circumstances, it is, depending on who you talk to, it's a trial or a tribunal. You cannot commit that type of, you can't try to overthrow the Constitution. You just can't do that. It doesn't matter what type of Masonic fraternity you belong to or what type of banking, how much money your family has, you just can't go there. Because if you don't succeed in some perfect multiracial republic in 2050, if you don't succeed in rearranging things, if you fail, it's a hanging trial. You know, it's just like wiping out Indo-European children. If you want to go down that road, once you commit yourself, you better succeed. Because if you don't succeed, you're in a tribunal. Someone's going to be wise enough to throw you into a loop you're not going to get out of. My enemy has more enemies than you can imagine, and most of them are non-white, believe it or not.
The United States has undergone a cultural, moral, and religious revolution. And a militant secularism has arisen in this country. It's always had a hold on the intellectual and academic elites. But in the 1960s, it captured the young in the universities and the colleges, and we had this great battle, cultural war begin then nationally. And since then, if you will, secularism has really achieved dominance in the academic community and the intellectual community and the entertainment community in Hollywood, among part of the political community, but not the nation as a whole. However, it is much stronger than it was, and so this is the basis of the great cultural war we're undergoing right now. And this militant, it is an anti-Christian, anti-God, anti-traditionalist revolution. It's partly the sexual revolution has a lot to do with it and how people live. And so we are two countries now. We are two countries morally and socially and culturally and theologically, and cultural wars do not lend themselves to peaceful coexistence. One side prevails or the other prevails, and the truth is that while the conservatives, in my judgment, we won the Cold War with political and economic communism, we have lost the cultural war with cultural Marxism, which I think has prevailed pretty much in the United States, or is now the dominant culture, whereas those of us who are traditionalists, we are, if you will, the counterculture.
Antonio Gramsci, while, where else but in prison, wrote up a series of plans, now known as the Prison Notebooks. In this plan, Gramsci announced, "The workers of the world will unite only after the Long March is over." The Long March?
In other words, they had to get into the culture and change the way of people's thinking. And if people were thinking about patriotism and nation and God and country, that was a mechanism which was too resistant to Marxism. It could never take hold. So you had to erode and destroy that in the individuals. That began what's called the Long March through the institutions, through the seminaries, through the churches, through the media, through Hollywood, and all the rest of it, to create an anti-Christian culture which would destroy the Christian beliefs and convictions in the vast majority of the people, so they would embrace the ideas of Marxism, and they would embrace the ideas that they had rejected, and they would be open to a takeover, basically, by Marxists. Now, not political Marxists, but cultural Marxists.
Rather than workers uniting and marching into battle, thus seizing power through force, they would make a long march through the institutions. Institutions like the arts, cinema, theater, literature, schools, college, seminaries, newspapers, magazines, and what is now known as radio, TV, and the mass media. Once this march is over, all the barriers to the acceptance of Marxism will have been quietly and systematically removed.
So to get to that point, they said we have to destroy the culture, and what they were talking about was the Christian culture, what we used to call Christendom or Western civilization.
If you can break people away from religious affinities, for example, where they would turn to their community, their religious community, for support and help, or they would turn to Scripture for answers to certain perplexing questions. If they have an affinity to their religion, they might say, well, we're not going to go along with government because it's contrary to my religion. So cultural Marxism would attack religion of all kinds. Doesn't make any difference, because there was another place where people could go other than to the government for support and for answers.
Not to be outdone by Karl Marx, a brilliant mind or two at the Frankfurt School soon came up with several of their own ideas, the foremost known as critical theory. The idea behind critical theory is to challenge all previously accepted standards in every aspect of life from a Marxist perspective. Standards such as Abe Lincoln was honest, home is where the heart is, democracy and capitalism are good, the founders believed in freedom. In doing this, every negative thing one could possibly say about America was dredged up, circulated in books, movies, TV, schools, colleges, and even the clergy, so that the youth would be endlessly indoctrinated. Things like white men killed the Indians, fathers were repressive, God is dead, the founders had slaves.
They did have a problem, which was that although slavery was technically legal throughout all the colonies, only some of the colonies really had slave-based economies. The southern states, Maryland, South, essentially. And therefore they had to deal with the practical problem of how could you integrate these states with the northern and middle colonies, middle states and northern states, in a way that would, as much as possible, unify them. So they had to make some kind of initial political compromises with the social institutions that existed in the southern states. But there was a mindset at the time that slavery would essentially wither away because it was not a practical economic concern in the long run. But it certainly was not a matter that could be criticized from the point of view of principle. You know, the first principle in the preamble is to create a more perfect union. That was their first goal.
But when the consciousness-challenged baby boomers repeatedly heard that the establishment, as they came to refer to it, was a bunch of racist, overly religious, sexually deprived sexists who were xenophobic Indian killers and anti-Semites, they internalized the criticisms. Soon their movies and songs began to reflect these values, spreading them throughout the nation's youth culture. Critical theory was doing its job, especially on people like Charles Manson and John Lennon. Even though the reality-challenged baby boomers of the 1960s were the most free, most affluent, and most privileged of any youth in any age, they were bored with their lives and swallowed the Frankfurt School's propaganda like a hit of California Sunshine. Books like The Death of the Family, Escape from Freedom, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, The Sexual Revolution, The Joy of Sex, and The Authoritarian Personality flew off the shelves. Counterculture drug movies like The Trip, Easy Rider, The Wild Angels, The Wild Bunch, and Born Loser played theaters endlessly. Books like Authoritarian Personality were particular hits because they attacked the patriarchal family unit, a deeply Christian institution. So along came movies depicting the family unit as sexually repressed and dysfunctional. Movies like Battle of the Sexes, How to Handle Your Wife, Harold and Maude, The Graduate, Bonnie and Clyde, Carnal Knowledge, Bob and Ted and Carol and Alice, Boys in the Band, The Godfather, and Kramer versus Kramer instilled cultural pessimism about families.
The basic unit of a family is where a male as a sex joins with a female as a sex, and they're able to work together to help each other. And by being able to work together to help each other, they perfect each other, they love each other, they care for each other. And in the process, they learn to love and perfect and care for others within the society. They become good citizens because they're good citizens within their own home, and that produces a society that loves each other. Marriage is a particularly Judeo-Christian institution. It was Jesus who instituted one man and one wife, forever shall become one flesh.
By targeting the family unit, the cultural Marxists knew they could eventually destroy the middle class of the United States. Why? Because the family unit is the basic building block of the middle class. Destroy the middle class, and you eventually destroy the economic engine of the United States. Destroy the economic engine of the U.S. and its political structure, built on capitalism and the Constitution, crumbles.
I just recently had some shares stolen from me on the stock market by our government, who seized 80% of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac shares. I'm like, how could this happen? They seized, private property.
The whole point of a socialistic society is to do four things. Marx talks about destroying the family, 2, destroying property, 3, destroying religion, and 4, destroying the nation. And what you end up with is the gulag, where the whole country becomes the Soviet Union.
Yes, critical theory is diabolical genius. The cultural Marxist could accomplish what Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin only dreamed of accomplishing. Whereas Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin took Marx's ideas and delivered the brutal Soviet Union to the world, Gramsci, Lukács, and Marcuse took Marx's ideas and delivered user-friendly cultural Marxism to America.
The Supreme Court has been converted into a fighting ally of secularism in the wars against traditionalism in the United States. The Supreme Court has perverted the Constitution. It has usurped power that belongs to the states and imposed secular views and values on the states and on the communities, making decisions that used to be made democratically at the local level.
This time it seems Marx won. Today, post-Engel, politically correct baby boomers are so completely immersed in the Frankfurt School's cultural pessimism, they can't see the forest for the trees. They're fish in a bowl of muddy water. They're Neo in the Matrix. They swim in it. They absorb it through every pore of their beingness. Starting in the 1960s, cultural Marxism has woven its values into every American's very existence. Khrushchev was right when he said, "We will bury you." The nefarious genius of cultural Marxist strategy is to destroy the family unit by promoting what's known in the field of botany as androgyny. From the American College Dictionary, androgyny means, quote, having staminate and pistillate flowers in the same inflorescence, being both male and female, hermaphroditic, end quote. Translated into cultural Marxist strategy, this means making the father and mother of a family the same, and or reversing their roles. How is this done? Well, it starts with invalidation.
I hate this house, and I don't want to be here anymore.
As previously discussed, one of the key technologies of the Frankfurt School is critical theory. Recall, the purpose of critical theory is to instill